So, first of all, guys, welcome to the Contech On-Site Podcast with me, Eliyahu Rappaport. I'm the host, and I'm super excited and stoked to invite Matteo Pietrobelli to the podcast. Matteo is one of the most interesting guys that I had the opportunity to talk to, taking part in some really intriguing and cool projects, including floating cities. He took part in the Hyperloop. He took part of a really exciting project, and he's here to share some of his insights with us. Matteo, thank you for joining the podcast. How are you doing today?
Doing fine. Thank you for having me, Eliyahu. Much appreciated.
It's a sincere pleasure. But just tell us about yourself, maybe a little about your journey.
I was blessed to be involved in, I would say, some of the most, I think, interesting and innovative projects that have been out there so far in the industry. And I'm not just talking about from a perspective of the Hyperloop or the Oceanix city project, but also talking about it from like a more consolidated construction industry projects, such as the Tappan Zee Bridge, the new Governor Mario Cuomo Bridge in Tarrytown in New York. On that project, and I work on very cutting edge structural health system monitoring systems, and or the LaGuardia Airport, the Delta Terminal, and the Long Island Railroad third track. I mean, some of the biggest and I would say most innovative projects in general in the construction industry, in not just worldwide, but I would say also here in the North America area.
That's exciting. But I definitely think that there's a bit of a touch of like maybe how that entrepreneurialism also like kind of meets you in your positions today. Maybe in terms of how it helps you think differently, or just kind of a mindset or mind frame that you have.
It allows you to have a perspective that you cannot take anything for granted, really. You know, how important are relationships, and not just relationship from a perspective of client service provider relationship, let's say, or I think one of the most important relationship you can have are with your partners, right? In general, with your colleagues or the people that are actually being part of the journey. Since the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic, and now with the situation with the energy crisis between Europe and the war between Ukraine and Russia. I mean, if we want, we can add other stuff to talk about uncertainties, but it's challenging, right? So, and it's important to really be surrounded by people that trust you, that you trust, and also people that you challenge, and people that can challenge you in a proactive way. And I think that is probably the most important thing, because you don't really go far if you go alone, right? It's you probably go fast, but in order to go far, you have to go with a good team, and especially with a team of peers, if I can say that.
Okay, incredible. How do you get to what you're doing today, and kind of why don't you share a little bit about some of the projects that you're involved in?
I would say a journey. If I have to think about 5 years ago, I would have never thought about being here and working on projects like Hyperloop or Oceanix, honestly speaking. It's been a journey of decisions made on really trying to take a leap of faith towards things that are a little bit unusual, or things that were really in the innovative realm. From one decision, there are doors that open up for you, and you just have to pick the right one, I guess, right? So, and it's been like that since I started. I started in Asia, in China, working on my thesis back in college. Then I went to Africa. Then after Africa, I work a little bit in Europe, and then in the United States, on mostly in New York, and I would say California and Florida. And since then, and since working on different projects, I made choices, and those choices led me to meeting people, and opening up opportunities, and again, just taking a leap of faith and joining these opportunities.
Yeah, you know that you have an appeal, or you even have like a real keen interest into getting into some more innovative projects. That's like you're even looking for it, right?
Yeah, no, that is true. That is actually true. I mean, I've been always interested in looking at something that is a little bit more outside of the box in the industry, because it's there's a lot of innovation that can be done. We can think about the monitoring systems and IoTs from a perspective of relating digital with physical, right? So physical infrastructures, we know what it is. We have bridges, we have roads, but how can we really integrate the digital layer into the physical layer, right? Or and that was something that we did worked on for the Governor Mario Cuomo Bridge, talking about 3D printing. 3D printing. I got exposed to it because I was working already for Hyperloop, and in Hyperloop we started to investigating technologies that could accelerate the construction speed. And of course 3D printing became a thing that we really started to look into. That I was like, we're talking about 2016, 2015 for 3D printing of concrete structures. Once you start to investigate and see that there are opportunities out there, and there are like incredible bright-minded, innovative people that are on the same journey as yours, it becomes inevitable to at least investigate it, or try to join it from a perspective of course, the way each individual can help. It's a fair statement. I've been always keen in looking for these type of opportunities.
And I think, like, just like you said, the more you dig in and the more opportunities, right, you kind of figure out are really maybe even on the sidelines or just not under the general focus of the rest of the industry, right? I find that, and that becomes even more intriguing, and it kind of like creates this thirst to kind of learn what else is out there that we're not maybe applying or not aware of, or what could be done better. Maybe one of the things that we could talk about is really one of the really exciting projects you're part of, and it relates to floating cities in Korea. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Oceanix is, I would say, it's not the first company that comes up with the idea of developing floating infrastructures, but it is indeed the first company that is developing the first prototype, especially in such a I would say technologically advanced country such as South Korea. And I would say we are the first ones that are approaching this from a neighborhood perspective. When I say neighborhood perspective, I'm saying that we're not really developing individual units for individual families or multi-families. The idea is to really create something that is embracing sustainability, is embracing comfort, is embracing safety, and it's really tailored from a specific point of view in relation to the geographies that we are designing and developing the systems. Because for example, our platform is the size of 1.6 hectares, right? It's a massive platform and the size of I would say a New York City block. But that was like a result of not just a decision made up like that, but more of an analysis that we've been doing, and it was the result of the integration of different needs, such as comfort for the inhabitants, the proximity to land. We're not trying to do something that is out there in the ocean. We're trying to be perceived as a plug-in to coastal cities in areas where, for example, ports are reaching their life expectancy, and we're really trying to be perceived as a transition from the urban fabric, right, into a new neighborhood, basically. And so if you think about it from that perspective, it's really challenging to be perceived as such once you see all of the different ideas out there of small units, one single families. They might work very well in the canal in Amsterdam because wave action is almost not existent. You have a lot of space and you can actually use that as a real estate asset. But in areas like South Korea, that's not the case. And so you really need to adapt and to provide solutions that are, I would say, more geographically driven. And so that's what we're doing in Oceanix.
Very cool. I mean, there's so many moving pieces and also so many different interests to align, right, while creating this project. A lot of different things that need to be taken into account, just like you're discussing, like the sustainability and what does it look like? What are the needs, and I would say potentially how are things gonna, in a very practical way, be implemented not only in on the construction process, but I mean in terms of who's going to live there and how they're going to live there and what that's going to look like.
That is actually the reason why we are really approaching this as a plug-in, right? As a transition from the urban fabric, and that's because what we're trying to avoid, for example, is being a burden to the city. And the city, when I say the city, I'm saying a burden to the existing um, electric grid or water aqueducts or waste systems. Using this new trend in urban planning, civil engineering design as well, which is the decentralizations of neighborhoods. We're all living. I'm here in New York, but I'm sure this is the same case for neighborhoods in mega cities in California or in Florida or in Europe. We're all living on the shoulders of these heavy legacy networks. We're talking about electric grids, for example, right? Or the aqueducts that transfer the water from the mountains down to the down to the cities from specific aquifers, and this is really in every time you expand or you add buildings in the cities, you really are adding a burden to this framework and to these networks. And so the idea is how we can do this better, how we can make neighborhoods, I would say, independent and relying on their own systems. From that perspective, we're not the first one doing it. I mean, there are a lot of sustainability endeavors out there in the world. They are tailored specifically on one system. For example, we have the energy city that is completely independent because that specific city is hooked to their own specific energy harvesting system and energy storage and energy distribution system. If you can do this from a neighborhood perspective, it will really release that burden. It will really allow to also find a better way to deal with the energy prices, for example, or I would say energy crisis as well. And this is a very hot topic right now. Why do we have to rely on decisions made by governments, let's say 20, 25 years ago? For example, in not following up with the idea of using nuclear power, right? And now, in a situation where there is a shortage of gas, and trying to find a way to support that shortage. If you had a neighborhood that can rely on its own geothermal energy or its own solar power energy or a mix of the two, of course, integrated with the existing connection with the grid, you can trade off energies that come from natural resources with energy that is coming from the grid based on the availability, based on the fluctuations of the different sources. And that not only guarantees, I would say, certain independence legacy network, but also it allows residents to make investments in thinking about how can I actually reduce my cost of energy, right? Or how I can actually rely not specifically on the grid, I can rely on my own supply of energy. How can I store it? And that's the same for water. You can rely, of course, on the aqueduct, but we have a lot of rain. Why cannot we use rainwater harvested and stored and cleaned and polished? There are systems out there. There are a couple of those here in New York City, for example, that harvest rainwater and cleans it and polish it up to a point where the drinking levels and the quality actually it's even higher than the quality you can have from the faucet directly from the aqueducts right now in New York. If you think about doing this from a neighborhood perspective, it really adds value because again you don't need to rely specifically only on the grid. You can rely on your own systems. In Oceanix, that's what we're doing. We're really decentralizing because we believe in also being completely sustainable, and we believe in achieving and in following the sustainability development goals from the United Nations, and that's actually our driver. And in designing it, we really raised the bar. We wanted to be as close as possible to 100% sustainable.
It's very interesting because at the end of the day, there's this on one hand this yearn for decentralization, definitely in terms of dependency, which is always something that's a difficult thing to have, right? And I think today in general we're so dependent on natural gas and on many resources, that put many people at certain in a vulnerable at some sort of vulnerabilities, definitely on a global scale. Even right now, with the global situation, with the unfortunate wars and all these different global impacts, we're all vulnerable to them, right? And creating more sustainable environments, has direct impact on how much we're vulnerable towards those global impacts. And so that's super interesting. I'm now trying to I'm there's a lot to think about over there, and it's actually going to be also very interesting to understand, like, okay, so how are these floating cities actually going to make these differences, and also maybe what kind of efforts, there's like it's not a new idea, right? So much as it is, like, there's a lot of tradition that's being complemented here with a lot of innovation. It'd be interesting to just kind of pick your brain along those lines, like what's going into getting such projects done, and what kind of an effort you've seen and you could share with us.
I mean, it's a massive scale, right? The most important thing is, I would say, finding a user, the end user. Because we're dealing with citizens, and we're dealing, of course, with the building codes, and we're dealing with the not just building codes, but we say with the regulatory frameworks. It's important to find a country, a city that is actually excited and is willing to help and willing to engage and willing to I would say support you in streamlining certain processes that otherwise it could be incredibly burdensome. And so the most important thing is that we have an incredible partner, which is the city of Busan, and I would say the country overall in South Korea. We have the luck, I would say, of dealing with the South Koreans, which are notoriously happy and notoriously driven by innovation and technology application. And they're also very well aware of the fact that in the south border of their country there is a lot of water, and there is a huge ocean, that is facing their coast. And so the seawater level rising is an issue that they've been experiencing, that they've been noticing, that they've been actually monitoring and recording.
Mhm.
And they are trying to drive a part of their economy into what floating infrastructures are. Lucky strikes most of the time happen. Um, we were lucky to show the project to them, and they were actually looking for something like that as well. There was a perfect, I would say, mix between two parties. And so this is the first most important thing, I would say, and I'm super grateful for that. Of course, we have the involvement of the United Nations that has been auditing and checking our design from a sustainability perspective, and is vouching for that because of a solution from a climate adaptation point of view. Then you have a series of other layers from industry partners, different consultants, and in general people that are really working with you on this.
Mhm.
And it's an ecosystem that most likely and hopefully will become an industry, and that is going to be able to not only add value but also add solutions that are climate tech driven, or blue tech driven. And so if you ask me, what we're doing here is we're building a galaxy of different options and different opportunities with the different our competitors and the people out there. And so in order to do that, you really need to engage a lot of different levels and in a lot of different places, from, as I said before, from consultants to government agencies to the committees from different neighborhoods in cities, and so on. So it's complex. It requires a lot of attention and focus, but at the same time, it's an exciting universe to be in, and people are excited about it, which really really helps.
Think you brought up one of the things that a lot of in the I would say in the adopting of technology processes is something very frequent that happens, right? It's finding those early adopters, finding those who are willing to take on, a project of, I would say a very innovative, very futuristic um, project, and actually be willing to pay the price of being an early adopter. And there's a lot of different challenges, and the fact that you have such great things great experience also working on this project. It means that you guys really found, very good clients for it, and that's unique. No, and how is it working with them on an ongoing basis? Is there constantly, because I mean, a lot of times it requires for early adopters, a lot of times I think that there's a lot more alignment conversations that need to happen along the way. Just given the fact that they're really pioneering in something and there's a lot of question marks that end up being resolved in the middle of it. And there's, like maybe you could share a little bit about that process or that relationship with the client in terms of, you know, bridging and maybe figuring out some needs along the way that you guys had to, I guess, be resourceful in order to make them happen.
One of the most important things is that we had to show the concept, right, the vision,
Mm-hmm.
and that of course required, I would say, a conceptualization of the design, and with that means really going down to organizing the different frameworks and organizing, I would say, the way we are envisioning all of these different systems integrated within each other in order to basically achieve the vision. And so that was the most important thing, I would say, that allow us to show our vision, show our design, show how we're trying to do this. And of course it had to be vetted, right? So we had universities in South Korea have been going through evaluating the design in order to make sure that is also approved by some local authorities. And in addition to that, we're part of different committees in South Korea. There is a committee for floating cities, and we have another task force that is specifically related to informing the government on this floating infrastructure, let's say, industry that is emerging. And with us, there are other experts in South Korea on different topics to basically the floating infrastructure. And so it's a conversation that is ongoing. We had a meeting today, on Friday. We continue to have meetings on a weekly basis with different departments. Our co-founder is currently there in Busan and moving between Seoul and Busan, to talk with the federal government and also the local government. So it's a constant effort, and you really need to be ready for anything that is required or is asked to, in order to basically keep the ball rolling, let's say.
It sounds like you're doing a masterful job. So,
So,
sounds, it really is. It's the alignment of a lot of different interests that, a lot of different entities also build that security, build that trust that, within the uncertainty that also exists around the innovation, exists around the project, and still find the way, or I would say a lot of times it's finding some other objective criteria that help build that confidence.
yes.
You're right, in the team, in the vision, in the idea, in the design. So that's it, you guys are killing it. So maybe for a lot of people who don't really understand what goes into floating cities, maybe you could just elaborate just a little bit about kind of the extent of the measures that you guys kind of like thought through the process of coming up with a design.
We're design a floating platform that is floating, and therefore is able to accommodate the vertical movements due to the seawater level rising, but is also able to accommodate specific wave heights that were basically built into the design. Our design was based on a return period of 1,000 years in terms of wave height, and into the geographies of the north port of Busan, which is where the prototype would be built. And so the most important thing that was, I would say, accounted for and that drove the design was safety. And safety, it's absolutely paramount into this design. And with safety comes comfort as well. And so we did analysis that allow us to understand not just the horizontal accelerations, but the vertical accelerations that people would actually feel on the platforms in different location of the platform due to different directions of the waves and different heights and different frequencies, so that we could really understand what were those comfort levels, and if we were able to stay within a certain limit, which are limits that are derived by different international standards, from the American Bureau of Shipping to classifications agencies around the world. And so that was the most important thing. I would say the second important thing was geolocalization. We wanted to make sure that while able to accommodate the different movements due to the wave and to the tides and the water level rising, we also wanted to make sure that was stable and there was also not moving around, right? So the platforms are floating, but they're also, I would say, connected to the seabed in order to basically don't move laterally. And once you have, accomplished safety and comfort, what is important is livability. And
Hmm.
livability comes with it's a very broad term that really depends on the type of structure that you are building. There's a livability on top of an aircraft carrier, but you cannot really stay on top of that more than 6 to 8 months. It's really a matter of the way the vessels are designed, and as well as for submarines or for other type of structures, as well as in the architectural industry. There's of course a livability concept into prisons. There's a livability concept that goes into high rise, into nursing homes, etc. And so what we did here, we really use a mix of all of this concept that comes into livability of a real estate project, and the livability of a floating structure, and mixing them in order to basically achieve the highest standards all over them, right? Because
Hmm.
we don't wanna really run into risk of not being able to provide and to really add value in that sense. And so with that comes all of the integration of the systems. So the energy systems, the waste systems, the water system, the food system, the mobility. How the inhabitants and the visitors will move um, within the platform, between platforms, and between platforms and mainland. How to guarantee that there is a transportation from a macro perspective, from a micro perspective. And so it's there are a lot of different inputs, and there are a lot of different considerations that comes into place, but I would say those are the main ones that I think I can share so far.
Okay. Super interesting, intriguing. I feel like if we continue, um, uh, we could dig into this for a very long time. I am wondering though, like where else do you think there's the opportunity of like really utilizing floating cities, and also how far do you see this thing going? Like to what extent are we going to be seeing floating cities around us?
Talking about let's say floating neighborhoods, right? So a plug into coastal cities. A lot of countries are facing seawater level rising right now, and I think it's a matter of time when this is going to become an issue for Western countries, or for I would say more westernized countries. And so seawater level rising, it's a problem all over the world. It's a situation that needs to be tackled, and there are a lot of different endeavors from a climate change, from a climate mitigation. But recently, I mean, not recently, but in general, the United Nations is also pushing towards climate adaptation, which is, it's very important to consider as well. And I think a lot of places out there might actually benefit from this. Now, you're asking me what's going to happen in the future? I have no idea. We're trying to provide an option and a solution, and you never know what is going to happen, right? There are certain forecasts. They're based on certain models that are giving us an idea of the height of the seawater in the next, let's say, 20, 30 years. It's they're forecasts models, and we
Mhm.
don't really know if they are accurate enough. The new data are coming in every year that shows that in reality, those models are hyper conservative. There are other models that are showing us that in reality the seawater level rising is actually accelerating. So it's really more about setting a vision and then adapting in the way the market and the environment is evolving. I think that's probably the best option that I can see for the future right now.
Really interesting. Really, one of the topics that we discussed in the past is really some of the big challenges, right? Like some of the big challenges that the construction industry faces as an industry, and maybe also some of the barriers that also prevent technology from being adopted. And one of the big ones that we discussed was actually the fragmentation, right, that exists. And I'd love to pick your brain on that. I'd love to have you share maybe some of your insights.
I think what's happening is we've been noticing how industries have been moving in the years, and some of them are, for example, the airplane manufacturing industry, or the vessel, or the marine architecture industry. And what is interesting to see is, let's say, for example, airplane manufacturing. Back in the days, they had a cluster of different companies. They were designing, they were building specific components, and then things were assembled together. And so there were really different aircraft that were being built. Eventually, there's been the industry started to consolidate, and as a result of this consolidation, only two players emerged, or I would say survived the consolidation, which are the only two players that actually design and build commercial aircrafts, which is Boeing and Airbus. A similar thing is happening from a marine perspective. A similar thing is happening from, I would say, a car manufacturing perspective. We have, of course, new industries that are coming in, such as the electric vehicles. And so there are specific companies like Tesla that are emerging from that industry. But it's, of course, they're very geographically driven. Some of them are multinational companies because they are in Europe, but they also exist in the United States. Some of them are just a conglomerate, right? But they also went through this whole consolidation process. And it's interesting to see how in the industry, especially from a housing perspective, in the architectural engineering and construction industry, there is this trend towards consolidation as well. And you can see how off-site manufacturing, I would say 3D printing, and integrated design approaches are taking over. There is this big trend into computational design, and so adoption of digital with standard practices, optioneering, the idea of being able to manipulate geometries and manipulate design digitally before manufacturing it. And once you have an established system such as off-site manufacturing, you can really rely on repeatability as well, and on speed, because all of these can just be assembled in a matter of days, really, in on site, once they're all designed and assembled in the factories. There are certain trends that are going towards, I think, this consolidation process. Of course, they are into areas where there is, I would say, low risk from a liability and from a, I would say, structural perspective. But since technology is advancing so fast, since we're seeing new technologies coming in from, as I said before, from a 3D printing perspective, from an off-site manufacturing perspective, from automation perspective, right, and like robotics in construction, it would be interesting to see how this consolidation might actually start to spread out and reach other corners of the industry, and they're not just related to housing, but maybe related to infrastructure, for example, or related to mid-rise buildings, and see how that can actually add more value to the end customer, to the end consumer, which is the people that will be living in it.
Yeah, I think we're really one of the core reasons this podcast arose, it came to existence, is because my firm entirely, Global Construction Tech, entirely focuses on the technology, specializing in the construction technology that exists today, and seeing what the opportunities are. And you're seeing all these advancements, and yet there's a certain lag and certain, I would say, fallacy in terms of what you would think would be adopted and wouldn't think should be adopted, maybe happening, but not the latter, not so much. But a lot of times we're like looking, oh wow, like this technology seems so practical, so applicable, why isn't it happening? And then you start digging into the inner dynamics of the industry, and you start understanding, okay, the fragmentation plays a significant role, but then also how can we actually see the total value that the end client will actually be getting from it, and how does that translate to an end client, and how does it also translate, in a fragmented industry, to all the players that are involved, right, in the construction process. um and I think that the value question is something that keeps me very busy. And one of the things that you're talking about here is really kind of that prefabrication, or that ability to create some sort of manufacturing line, right, for how we're doing certain elements potentially, or even entire projects in a more consistent manner.
No,
And
that's true. That's true.
yeah, and what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on that, in terms of, let's say, for example, right? Even if we take a modular building, and we start assessing it, towards clientele. I think one of the big challenges we've seen in terms of costs is when it comes to logistics, it tends to be more costly, and when it comes, but at scale, potentially not. So, like, maybe what would be very cool to kind of see is maybe one technology, that you've come across, or maybe even 3D printing, since you brought it up, and kind of say, like, kind of just hear your insight on anything. It doesn't have to be 3D printing, doesn't have to be modular. It could be about really anything, but like how you see it, like, translating, or getting lost in the value chain, towards the end client.
Every person perspective will be driven by its own experience, right? And I think in order to have a real answer, we should bring together, I would say, a think tank of people that are from different areas of the industry that can really brainstorm and brings things together from problems to solution perspective. In my humble opinion, I've seen here in New York as well, the application of volumetric module and into the construction of actually high-rise buildings. There are a couple of hotels here in New York that they were just finished. They're actually being designed and built with the volumetric module construction approach. I believe the choice was driven by the repeatability of some of those volumes, as well as I would say, the repeatability of the facade system, which really allowed to rely on a manufacturing approach where there was a lot of repetition, and so it really made sense. It would be interesting to see how that can be used on situations where we have this massive high rise that have incredible shapes. The interior structure most of the time needs to accommodate the architectural vision, and so you don't want to have a wall here, you don't want to see the column here, and you don't want to have the core that spreads too much. There are a lot of different needs that are driven by the architect. And I think it would be interesting to see if we are going towards more of a standardizations of architectural designs, so that we can actually also standardize the structural design as well as the MEP design, and as much as possible also the geotechnical design, as well as geotechnical is very much driven by soil and wherever you're going to actually design and build a building. It definitely can be an option, for certain type of buildings that might have the opportunity of being easily. I don't envision a world, for example, where we have buildings that all look alike. I don't think that that is gonna actually work, and it doesn't really add any value, and it can be terribly boring, honestly. I believe there is going to be no one silver bullet at that point. If I have to think about it, there is going to be a series of solutions that are going to be very much project driven, and the application of the technologies might be necessary only on specific projects, and might add value only on specific projects. I think the more we go into advancing as a society and as a planet, we're going to see the need of adopting technologies, because there is a huge lack of manpower, and that's another big issue here. And so, with the lack of manpower, maybe automation might play a big role, and it will drive somehow the design as well. So the design will not be necessarily driven by the architectural design, but it will also be driven by the shortage of labor, right? And so some technologies might need to be applied necessarily. And so I think at the end of the day, it seems as we might end up having to deal with an integration of systems or an integration of technologies driven by the specificity of the projects. That's the way I see it as of now. And I might be wrong again. It's which is I can totally be wrong, but there are different technologies coming out there, and some of them have been applied and are being applied in certain industries or in certain niches of the industry, and it would be interesting to see how the whole concept will evolve.
Yeah. I think you touched upon like a few really interesting things. And first of all, I definitely agree. I think there's a myriad of solutions that you need for, so many different needs. Everything, like whenever I look at a technology, it always stems from what is the need that they're trying to solve. Like, what is it? What is the need that they're trying to solve? And even though a lot of times I'll come off like 5 or 6 different competitors, they usually stem from a different need. Right. And then you're kind of like, okay, this is the application in which these guys are going to really bring, really bring value to the table, versus in another scenario, they could still bring value, but there's been someone who's been focused on the problem from such a different angle, and they're stemming from a different need, and they'll address that need better. And it's just very, really agree with you. And I think the future is very questionable. I have no clue where it's going, especially, yeah, it's I especially given the dynamics in the industry, and also how long will it take to actually be adopted. And by the time things are adopted, will the landscape look a little bit differently? Will we have like a major, climate crisis that we're going to have to be dealing with? But we don't know. But that uncertainty is very invigorating. It's very exciting for, that's part of the fun. This is why I think there's so many interesting topics to cover and really talk about and figure out, like you said, brainstorming with really a group of people who are looking at it all from different professional angles, and so I really agree with that. And there's one more thing that I thought it'd be cool to address is the entire there's a very big fear when it comes to technology in terms of it taking over, jobs, being a means in which, a lot of people see themselves, being kind of made redundant. And what my perspective always is, and I'd love to hear your perspective as well. And it's like, my perspective is always is these tools are meant to empower, even if we wanted to, right? There's millions of homes in the US that are actually needed, needed in order just to provide basic shelter for people, that we're not able to withstand the demand. We don't have the capacities, just based on shortage of labor. So if we could get to the situation where one person could be 10 times more productive, that actually makes sense in terms of how population is growing in the world, right? And in terms of what we need as a humanity, as a society, versus making people redundant. And more so, there's another element where people I think you also highlighted this once when we were talking, people with multidisciplinary perspective will be able to kind of use a lot more brain power versus just, their muscle power. And I think that that's a vision that I really hope for most of the industry, that we manage to get there. And we'll need people. We'll need a ton of people to man, these advancements. And I don't see people becoming redundant. I see people becoming extremely empowered. And I'd love to hear your perspective as well.
No, and I agree with you. Look, I was talking with a couple of people about this actually, and they brought up a story that I was not aware of, which is incredibly interesting. So it's about the tomato picking down in California, if I remember correctly. And long story short, it really doesn't matter where, but the question is, picking tomatoes is extremely hard under the sun. It's not fun, and it's brutal. It's brutal on people, and honestly speaking, it doesn't require a specific skill set. With, of course, with a specific respect to picking tomatoes, but it's something that it's very repetitive, right? And it really can alienate people or alienate workers. And so there was this trend of basically figuring out machines that could actually pick tomatoes with the sort of automatic arm. There is a company out there that eventually figured out and started using it. So because the machine has a little bit of a grip and it can be a little hard on tomatoes, you have to pick up tomatoes of a specific variety of specific varieties, ones that are they don't really get too soft once they're ripe, and or in general you tend to pick them a little bit earlier on. But long story short is, what happened to the people that were picking tomatoes? Well, eventually, because you have the machine out there, someone has to actually bring all of these tomatoes together, pack them, organize them. There is a whole supply chain that changed due to the integration of this machine. What happened is apparently workers ended up into a fresher environment, let's say, with the air conditioning. So not in the sun, cooking under the sun and being brutal under the weather, but they ended up into an AC conditioned environment with higher pay, eventually with better conditions as well. This is an example. You may end up having examples where the contrary happened, right? But I believe in overall, technologies adds value and replace jobs that are cumbersome for human beings, and human beings will eventually end up taking care of those technologies. And of course, it will require a different skill set. But the beauty is that as human beings, we can learn new skill set. We can be trained on this new skill set. And there is the story of the mechanics that takes care of the robotic arm that replaced him while he was working doing the job that the robotic arm is doing right now, because that individual was then trained in taking care of the machine. So it became a higher, let's say, position in the company, and he was able to accomplish a task that is way more, I would say, value adding than the automatic task that has been basically accomplished by the machine.
So he ended up specializing, right, and attaining new skill sets that really gave him the ability to become more important for the company, because he's able to produce and create a lot more value for the company.
Yeah,
Right.
and also for himself, because eventually he is one of the few that is able to do this. But the
Exactly.
more
Yeah.
machine will come out there, he's going to be the person that is able to it and to train others, which add even more value, I think, on the individual overall.
There's another thing that I think tends to be way underestimated, but it's actually very critical, is that the people who manage to overcome that, I would say, the pushback from adoption, and they understood the value of learning something new, will usually also be someone who ends up being a little bit more forward thinking, and also be more willing to adopt to a new technology that shows up a bit later, because he saw the value that was created and generated. And because of that, his feedback, his input, his ability to adapt to a new machine might even give him other opportunities, that might not be existent. And I find it very, very interesting. And it's a topic.
It's a topic.
The fear.
Yeah, I
There's
mean,
a lot of fear involved in innovation. There's a lot
no,
of
and you think about it, the same fear comes with also blue collar workers. A lot of technologies and automation is coming into the design, right? And that you will need less people, and you can already see it. Engineering firms have been shrinking. They went from drawing tables and a big size of firm to actually smaller firms, because of the fact that there are digital tools that can do the work of 10 to 15 people, especially from a coordination perspective, right? The question is, are we going to be replaced in general? I mean, I doubt it, because what is going to happen is that with new tools comes new problems, and therefore new solutions are needed. We just have to be open to embrace this, and I would say to be the solution providers.
I love it. I'm actually bummed, because we're gonna have to jump off the podcast, because our time is up, and we barely got through half of the topics I wanted to. But you know what it is? It gives us another opportunity, God willing, in the future, to have another one, to have another session.
Absolutely.
I mean, first of all, Matteo, I want to say a big thank you, for joining and getting on the podcast, sharing your really valuable insights. Yeah, I just want to thank you. Thank you very much.
Now, look, I appreciate it, and this is just my own view, right? I can be completely biased. I hope it's not, but in general, it's based on my own experiences, and there are probably different type of experiences out there that can give you different answers. So it would be interesting to see, as we said, like different point of views and bring them together.
Oh, okay, for sure. And it's important to say, like, the point of the podcast isn't that we think we know everything. It's not. It's a fact that we're really trying to talk to people with with like real professionals, with expertise, with real experience, who are willing to share insights from real projects. And I think that this is what it's about. And I think from my perspective, your insights have been invaluable, and I'm sure the general audience are going to enjoy it as well. And I want to encourage everybody here, guys, share, comment, like, engage with us, because when you leave comments and questions, we'll be able to kind of hopefully get back to you, and you maybe even give us ideas for a potential next session. So I highly encourage it. This is going to be a good wrap up. Matteo, thank you so much.
Thank you too, Eliavo. Have a good one.